Did I touch your life?
The U.S. Postal Service celebrates the 2017 Black History Month observance with the issuance of the Dorothy Height Forever stamp. The 40th stamp in the Black Heritage series honors Dorothy Height, a tireless activist who dedicated her life to fighting for racial and gender equality. Although she rarely gained the recognition of her male contemporaries, she did become one of the most influential civil rights leaders in the 20th century.
I guess what I would say, my name is Ingrid Saunders Jones. I have the privilege of being the chair of the National Council of Negro Women, the 6th chair in the 81-year history of NCNW. And it is such an honor and such a joyous day to have Dorothy Irene Height, the iconic leader of NCNW, to have a stamp unveiled. She meant so much to so many, our nation, the women of this nation, the civil rights the civil rights movement, and she just was, and she always will be.
First of all, let me just say what a pleasure and an honor it is to be here. Dr. Height was truly a mentor, an icon, a legend, and one who made sure that she empowered people to understand the importance of changing what is considered normal. She never believed in normalcy. She believed that you can always outdo what you've already done. So I say this has been a wonderful, wonderful day. And I am currently the National President of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. My name is Dr. Paulette C. Walker, and Dr. Height was our 10th National President. And her work in NCNW has has outlasted all of us. So again, today is Dorothy Irene Height's Day, and I am thankful and blessed to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you just like to say a little bit about some of her work?
Dr. Height was an activist. She was definitely one who made sure that we got things done. The work that she did in terms of with the sorority as well as in general, the work that she did with civil rights movement, with women's rights movements, with activists. She helped form many of the initial programs and initiatives that started to make sure that women as well as people of color were heard in this country. She is noted for being the voice behind the civil rights movement, and in fact, our past president, President Obama, called her the godmother of the civil rights movement because of the work that she did.
And emphasize that it was a time that it was very difficult, not like, today we've moved much further.
Yeah, and let me say, one who was in college in the 1960s, I always looked up to her because I knew that when I was on that campus, if Dorothy Height was doing it, I knew it was all right to do it. Because you're absolutely right. Times were very, very different then than they are now in terms of the ability to express yourself, to protest, and to know that you have that right to be able to do that. So we're thankful for all that she's done. Thank you.
My name is Elaine Jones, and I'm former head of the Legal Defense Fund, NAACP Legal Defense Fund in New York.
New York. And tell us some of the accomplishments.
Accomplishments of Dorothy?
Yes.
Oh, I have known Dorothy since a young lawyer in 1972. And we made her an honorary lawyer because she was so good. Dorothy, every issue that has come up in the last 40 years that had to do with social justice and civil rights, Dorothy was there. And in 2001, Dorothy was in the conference in Durban, South Africa. In 2001, the World Peace Through Law Conference. And she was in her 90s then. And it was a 3-day conference, and she's always been such an inspiration. But not only that, she's insightful. Dorothy was strategic. She would tell us how to approach the issues. You can't just talk to people about it. You have to give people a way to be engaged. And she showed us how to do that. How to be inclusive, how to reach out, how to include both genders, all races, all religions, and our strength was in our unity. And she was extraordinary, and we loved her, and we love her still.
My name is Vivian Smith, and I served on the National Council of Negro Women Board with Dr. Height, and I also chaired our national convention for 3 conventions and enjoyed working with her immensely, learned an awful lot from her, that she was a hard but benevolent, kind, compassionate taskmaster. You worked with Dr. Height, but you loved doing it because she always gave you the feeling that you were helping somebody else and you were helping her in the process. My favorite story with her was I called her on her birthday every year to sing happy birthday to her. And one year after I finished singing happy birthday, and I thought I'd done pretty good that year, she said, "And now who told you you could sing?" But that was Dr. Height. She loved young people, and we enjoyed. Zilla Wesley, who is here with me, was a person who came in and worked with the young people in preparation of our convention. So we enjoyed that level of work with her, and the fact that she always surrounded herself with the children and looked for the children in terms of their academics. We had the Dorothy Height contest during the convention, and she loved to hear what the children had written about whatever the issue was of the day. It was not about writing about her. It was writing about some current issue for which they got some sort of award.
They got an award, a monetary award, and other kinds of backpacks with fun activities in it. And also, Dr. Height was also interested in boys participating in our youth conferences. And she made sure my children were always involved in it. And she made you feel good. I don't care who you were. I consider myself an average person. I was invited to anything Dr. Height wanted me to come to. I got to travel with her, Vivian. Because of Vivian, Dr. Height said, if you with Vivian, it's fine. And I would travel with her, and just wonderful experiences. And I just never will forget it. Never.
And where will it go from here?
Well, from here, I hope that we continue doing some of the things we have done. It has taken us a while to adjust to Dr. Height not being there, but we are pushing along with NCNW, with the building on Pennsylvania Avenue, keeping the funding going for that building, and making sure that women and girls do the things they should do. My daughter is also involved in the YWCA, which Dr. Height was a part of for most of her life. And what else do you think?
The good thing about NCNW right now is that we have people in the leadership role who share her vision and who can think outside of the box and who will look for things that benefit the greater good.
Yes.
I don't think we have people who are looking to elevate themselves. They're looking to elevate people, not black people, not white people, not yellow people, but to benefit people, because that's what Dr. Height was all about.
Right.
She focused on black folks, yes. She focused on women, yes.
Yes.
But for the greater good was where she really and truly put her interest, her energy, and her efforts. Yeah.
And just to end on a fun note, tell me about the hats.
Oh, the hats, the hats. I'll tell you a real fun note with Dr. Height and the hats. She wore hats all the time. She had beautiful hats. People were always giving her hats. She was a guest speaker at my church once. And this is a nice little fun joke because I am an Alpha Kappa Alpha woman. Dr. Height was a Delta Sigma Theta woman. She came to my church to speak at the Mount Moriah Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. And I presented her when she finished with a pink hat. And she just thought that was the funniest thing ever. She had a wonderful sense of humor. And she could do with whatever you brought to her. If you brought it to her in love and kindness and encouragement, she would use it and she would turn it to the good.
Yes.
Yeah. Her hats were beautiful, and I think her hats are traveling around shows now. And we'll never forget her, and we'll never forget the hats.
Right. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As the 17th president of this institution, it brings me great joy to host this event on the historic campus of Howard University. It is certainly befitting that the 40th stamp in the Black Heritage Series of the United States Postal Service's Forever Stamps honors Dr. Dorothy Height, a timeless activist who dedicated her life to advocating for those affected by racial and gender inequalities. No one will do for you what you need to do for yourself. We cannot afford to be separate. We have to see that all of us are in the same boat. These words spoken by Dr. Height are extremely relevant as America grapples with some of its most challenging times. Yet, I find solace in the legacy of those who came before us and the bright promise of our future that reminds us to be obsessed with the journey because no one destination will ever satisfy us. Dorothy Irene Height was a longtime civil rights activist, chair and president emerita of the National Council of Negro Women, and often recognized as the godmother of the women's movement. Dorothy Height headed the National Council of Negro Women from 1957 when she was elected the organization's 4th national president to 1998 when she became the group's chair and president emerita. She was the female team leader in the civil rights leadership along with the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Whitney Young, A. Philip Randolph, James Farmer, Roy Wilkins, and John Lewis, who you'll hear from today. She served as national president of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority from 1947 to 1956. On a campus where more than 70% of my undergraduate student body is female, more than half of our academic deans are also women, I am inspired and influenced by women who served as trailblazers in order to ensure that countless women had the necessary resources and exposure to become effective leaders. Dr. Height advocated for families and encouraged children to value education and social justice. She was awarded America's 2 highest civilian awards, the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1994 by President Bill Clinton, and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2004 through an act of Congress.
And as I reflected on my own history with Dr. Height, I was blessed, really blessed, to have her in my life for nearly 50 years as a coach, as a mentor, and as a surrogate mother. And as I look out into this audience, her family, her friends who are all here, I know that we could probably spend the rest of the day, if not the entire week, sharing stories of Dorothy Height. My favorite story that I used to love to hear her tell me time and time again was the time that she accompanied Mrs. Bethune to the White House. And Mrs. Bethune was welcoming for the first time all of the leaders of the National Council of Negro Women to join her and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. And so Dr. Height told the story of how they all gathered at the White House. And Mrs. Roosevelt actually invited Mrs. Bethune to descend that grand stairwell with her into the East Room. And as a young Dorothy stood there with Mrs. Bethune, she looked down at her shoes as they were about to descend that stairwell. And she said, "Oh my God, Mrs. Bethune, you have on one black and one blue shoe. You can't go into the East Room with mismatched shoes." And Dr. Height tells the story of how Mrs. Bethune looked at her with that special gleam in her eye and said, "Dorothy, we as black women don't follow style, we set style." And so when I think of the life of Dorothy Height, I remember that story. Because I know as she would tell that story, as she said over the years, she never forgot that look of confidence in Mrs. Bethune's eyes. And it was that same spirit of boldness and confidence that I believe propelled her forward in her own life. It was certainly that spirit of boldness on that day in 1963, the March on Washington, where there she was, as we know, the only woman in the leadership lineup of what was then called the Big Six. But it was Dorothy Height who said to the men, you know, we have to have the voices of young people heard at this march. And so she actually gave up her slot to speak so that a young John Lewis would be able to address that magnificent crowd that day. John Lewis was just 23 years of age then. And of course, he was representing the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But I like to say, as he says in his own words too, John Lewis has been speaking up and speaking out for all of us from that day to this, and as he likes to say, making good trouble. John Lewis is someone who really has been the moral conscience of our country. He is someone who is respected on both sides of the aisle. And he continues to this day to lead with the same moral and ethical principles that have always characterized his life. He, of course, represents Georgia's 48th Congressional District, as he has since the late 1980s. And President Barack Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Won't you welcome to the stage Congressman John Lewis, my homeboy from Troy, Alabama.
Good morning. It is great and good to be here at Howard University. Dorothy Height would be very proud of each and every one of you. You look good. Beautiful, handsome. I first met Dorothy Height in 1963. 23 years old, as Alexa said. I had all of my hair and a few pounds lighter. She cared not just for women, but all of us. She cared for America. She cared for young people. Dorothy Height was one of the most gracious and thoughtful human beings you ever want to meet. She was charming and beautiful, a precious star in the galaxy of humanity. Dorothy was a talker, and in her own way, she was a mover and a shaker. She didn't take no for an answer. She was always on point. She was insistent and persistent. When other so-called leaders and civil rights heads were concerned about being proper and stand in line or stand in your place, Dorothy could speak up and speak out and say what needed to be said. She met with mayors, governors, and presidents. She championed the cause of civil rights, women's rights, and voting rights. She stood up for the unity of the African American family. So today, I think it is so appropriate that this woman, who was a mighty force for good, is being honored not just with a stamp, but a forever stamp. A beautiful stamp, because she was a beautiful woman. She stood for the timeless values that make this country great: equality, justice, and liberty. It is so fitting this stamp issued in honor of Dorothy Height will last forever and allow future and unborn generation to hear about her contribution that helped create a more perfect union, who helped free and liberate those of us who have been left out and left behind. So thank you for being here to celebrate the issue of this stamp for our sister, our leader, Dorothy Height.
Good afternoon. My name is Naima Randolph. I am the great-great-grandniece of, as we call her, Aunt Dorothy in my family. I'd like to thank the United States Postal Service on behalf of my family for dedicating and having this stamp of Aunt Dorothy. It's a really amazing thing because she talks about in her book, Living with Purpose, which I'm about to read from, about women in history and how often women, especially women of color, are pushed to the back and aren't acknowledged. So this stamp is really an honor and a step forward in honoring the amazing women who have done so much for everyone in this room, everyone in this country. So thank you so much. This comes from a chapter called Awakening to Injustice. And this is why she wrote this book. This book is not a prescription or a recipe. In finding purpose, there is no one-size-fits-all secret for success. It is not a straight path like 1, 2, 3, but a random aggregate of formative experiences, influences, and realizations. Sometimes the fruit of one circumstance may not be immediately apparent and perhaps may not come forth until years later. Quite often, as you will read later, the dots can connect up in the most unexpected and astonishing ways. Aunt Dorothy was a part of many movements, but especially those involving young people. Many people today do not appreciate what the civil rights movement truly meant. It was not about attitudes, it was about law. It is very interesting to go down into Mississippi now as opposed to the old days. It's amazing to see how people act totally different because of the laws. The students in the lunch and counter sit-ins were realists. They used to say, "Let them keep their prejudice, just give me my coffee." And finally, from her chapter, a special note to women. Around the world, women are making a contribution, and around the world, women have critical problems. With all the progress that has been made, women and girls are devalued. That is why often we give real recognition to the women who have come to realize their own personhood and who recognize that women have a unique contribution to make at every level of community life. I do not really stick with the idea of women as nurturers because I think women who realize their own human potential and bring into the public arena an appreciation for life that could help us deal with the warring tendencies. We have to work to help women see leadership is not a status. It is not something you go after. Leadership can be more in terms of capacity and willingness to respond to what is needed in a situation. That is the challenge to women today. Follow the history. Those women who have made a great contribution have done so through service, their awareness, and their determination to contribute to the empowerment of all. Thank you.
I'm William Briggs, one of the grandnephews of Dr. Height, and I got to tell you, this is a major accomplishment. I'm so proud and honored on behalf of the family that the U.S. Postal Service represented her with a stamp like this. and her accomplishments and achievements. You heard the roll call of accomplishments that she's had. They're so numerous. But one of the main things I think it was her stand for human rights, whether it was racial injustice or women justice. And I think she moved the needle big time in America, and I hope it continues.
Can you just tell us what she was like as a family member?
Oh my God!
That she embraced family.
As a family member, one of the key things that she did was to have a black family reunion for a lot of people. But when we all came together on the National Mall, her family, it was just stupendous. She had so much joy in her heart that day. It was phenomenal. And as a family member, my grandfather was her brother. So I don't know about everyone else. I mean, she embraced me and taught me along the way. She, in fact, is responsible for me going to college, taking me off the streets and going to college. So family was very important to her, and she wanted all of us to achieve. So thank you.
We're nephews also. I just want to say that she was very influential to the family, and she did not just live. This is what she lived for. She didn't live for anything else. She lived to help others, and I just want to pass that down to my family. And I just want to say that she was a blessing in our lives, and so many people out here, she was a blessing to others. And I just want to say this was a beautiful day. This ceremony was just, I can't even believe that my aunt is on a stamp, a forever stamp, and I just want to say just blessings. That's all.
Hi, I'm Charles Sessoms, S-E-S-S-O-M-S. I'm one of the grandnephews of Dr. Height. And when you mentioned what she meant for family is just like this example here. We're all from different parts of the country. And whenever she called and said, we need to meet or we need to participate in Black Family Reunion, or even if it wasn't one of her national events, we would all get together. It's probably one of the only times we do get together because we're so sporadically around the country. But this is a great event. We are so proud and grateful to be a part of this. And we miss her dearly. And we appreciate everything that everyone is doing in recognizing her and keeping the fight going because, as Alexis mentioned, there's so much more for us to do. Thank you.
I'm Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook. I was the third U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, the first woman, the first African American, and a goddaughter, one of those adopted daughters of Dr. Dorothy Height. She was with me when I became the first female president of the Hampton Ministers Conference, which is the largest African American clergy conference in the world. And she sat with me and said, "You are my daughter," she and Coretta Scott King. So I was so honored to be in the presence of greatness who had such humility, grace, and gravitas.
And I'm Kristal Hart reporting from Washington, D.C. on a Dorothy Height stamp. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching, and go to your local post office. Pick up a Dorothy Height stamp and mail a letter today.
Did I touch your